Chapter 3, Part 2 of The Subjection of Women. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Subjection of Women by John Stuart Mill. Chapter 3, Part 2. If the existing mental characteristics of women are thus valuable even in aid of speculation, they are still more important when speculation has done its work for carrying out the results of speculation into practice. For the reasons already given, women are comparatively unlikely to fall into the common error of men, that of sticking to their rules in a case whose specialties either take it out of the class to which the rules are applicable, or require a special adaptation of them. Let us now consider another of the admitted superiorities of clever women, greater quickness of apprehension. Is not this preeminently a quality which fits a person for practice? In action, everything continually depends upon deciding promptly. In speculation, nothing does. A mere thinker can wait, can take time to consider, can collect additional evidence. He is not obliged to complete his philosophy at once, lest the opportunity should go by. The power of drawing the best conclusion possible from insufficient data is not indeed useless in philosophy. The construction of a provisional hypothesis consistent with all known facts is often a needful basis for further inquiry. But this faculty is rather serviceable in philosophy than the main qualification for it. And for the auxiliary as well as for the main operation, the philosopher can allow himself any time he pleases. He is in no need of the capacity of doing rapidly what he does. What he rather needs is patience, to work on slowly until imperfect lights have become perfect, and the conjecture has ripened into a theorem. For those, on the contrary, whose business is with the fugitive and perishable, with individual facts, not kinds of facts, rapidity of thought is a qualification next only in importance to the power of thought itself. He who has not his faculties under immediate command in the contingencies of action might as well not have them at all. He may be fit to criticize, but he is not fit to act. Now it is in this that women, and the men who are most like women, confessedly excel. The other sort of man, however preeminent may be his faculties, arrives slowly at complete command of them. Rapidity of judgment and promptitude of judicious action, even in the things he knows best, are the gradual and late result of strenuous effort grown into habit. It will be said, perhaps, that the greater nervous susceptibility of women is a disqualification for practice, in anything but domestic life, by rendering them mobile, changeable, too vehemently under the influence of the moment, incapable of dogged perseverance, unequal and uncertain in the power of using their faculties. I think that these phrases sum up the greater part of the objections commonly made to the fitness of women for the higher class of serious business. Much of all this is the mere overflow of nervous energy run to waste, and would cease when the energy was directed to a definite end. Much is also the result of conscious or unconscious cultivation, as we see by the almost total disappearance of hysterics and fainting fits since they have gone out of fashion. Moreover, when people are brought up like many women of the higher classes, though less so in our own country than any other, a kind of hothouse plants, shielded from the wholesome vicissitudes of air and temperature, and untrained in any of the occupations and exercises which give stimulus and development to the circulatory and muscular system, while their nervous system, especially in its emotional department, is kept in unnatural active play, it is no wonder if those of them who do not die of consumption grow up with constitutions liable to derangement from slight causes, both internal and external, and without stamina to support any task, physical or mental, requiring continuity of effort. But women brought up to work for their livelihood show none of these morbid characteristics, unless indeed they are chained to an excess of sedentary work in confined and unhealthy rooms. Women who in their early years have shared in the healthful physical education and bodily freedom of their brothers, and who obtain a sufficiency of pure air and exercise in after life, very rarely have any excessive susceptibility of nerves which can disqualify them for active pursuits. There is indeed a certain proportion of persons, in both sexes, in whom an unusual degree of nervous sensibility is constitutional, and of so marked a character as to be the feature of their organization which exercises the greatest influence over the whole character of the vital phenomena. This constitution, like other physical conformations, is hereditary, and is transmitted to sons as well as daughters. But it is possible, and probable, that the nervous temperament, as it is called, is inherited by a greater number of women than of men. We will assume this as a fact. And let me then ask, are men of nervous temperament found to be unfit for the duties and pursuits usually followed by men? If not, why should women of the same temperament be unfit for them? The peculiarities of the temperament are, no doubt, within certain limits, an obstacle to success in some employments, though an aid to it in others. But when the occupation is suitable to the temperament, and sometimes even when it is unsuitable, the most brilliant examples of success are continually given by the men of high nervous sensibility. They are distinguished in their practical manifestations chiefly by this, that being susceptible of a higher degree of excitement than those of another physical constitution, their powers when excited differ more than in the case of other people from those shown in their ordinary state. They are raised, as it were, above themselves, and do things with ease which they are wholly incapable of at other times. But this lofty excitement is not, except in weak bodily constitutions, a mere flash, which passes away immediately, leaving no permanent traces, and incompatible with persistent and steady pursuit of an object. It is the character of the nervous temperament to be capable of sustained excitement, holding out through long continued efforts. It is what is meant by spirit. It is what makes the high-bred race-horse run without slackening speed till he drops down dead. It is what has enabled so many delicate women to maintain the most sublime constancy, not only at the stake, but through a long preliminary succession of mental and bodily tortures. It is evident that people of this temperament are particularly apt for what may be called the executive department of the leadership of mankind. They are the material of great orators, great preachers, impressive diffusers of moral influences. Their constitution might be deemed less favorable to the qualities required from a statesman in the cabinet or from a judge. It would be so, if the consequence necessarily followed that because people are excitable they must always be in a state of excitement. But this is wholly a question of training. Strong feeling is the instrument and element of strong self-control, but it requires to be cultivated in that direction. When it is, it forms not the heroes of impulse only, but those also of self-conquest. History and experience prove that the most passionate characters are the most fanatically rigid in their feelings of duty, when their passion has been trained to act in that direction. The judge who gives a just decision in a case where his feelings are intensely interested on the other side, derives from that same strength of feeling the determined sense of the obligation of justice which enables him to achieve this victory over himself. The capability of that lofty enthusiasm which takes the human being out of his everyday character reacts upon the daily character itself. His aspirations and powers, when he is in this exceptional state, become the type with which he compares, and by which he estimates, his sentiments and proceedings at other times, and his habitual purposes assume a character moulded by and assimilated to the moments of lofty excitement, although those, from the physical nature of a human being, can only be transient. Experience of races, as well as of individuals, does not show those of excitable temperament to be less fit, on the average, either for speculation or practice, than the more unexcitable. The French and the Italians are undoubtedly by nature more nervously excitable than the Teutonic races, and, compared at least with the English, they have a much greater habitual and daily emotional life. But have they been less great in science, in public business, in legal and judicial eminence, or in war? There is abundant evidence that the Greeks were of old, as their descendants and successors still are, one of the most excitable of the races of mankind. It is superfluous to ask what among the achievements of men they did not excel in. The Romans probably, as an equally southern people, had the same original temperament, but the stern character of their national discipline, like that of the Spartans, made them an example of the opposite type of national character. the greater strength of their natural feelings being chiefly apparent in the intensity which the same original temperament made it possible to give to the artificial. If these cases exemplify what a naturally excitable people may be made, the Irish Celts afford one of the aptest examples of what they are when left to themselves. If those can be said to be left to themselves who have been for centuries under the indirect influence of bad government and the direct training of a Catholic hierarchy, and of a sincere belief in the Catholic religion. The Irish character must be considered, therefore, as an unfavourable case. Yet, whenever the circumstances of the individual have been at all favourable, what people have shown greater capacity for the most varied and multifarious individual eminence? Like the French compared with the English, the Irish with the Swiss, the Greeks or Italians compared with the German races, so women compared with men may be found on the average to do the same things with some variety in the particular kind of excellence, but that they would do them fully as well on the whole, if their education and cultivation were adapted to correcting instead of aggravating the infirmities incident to their temperament, I see not the smallest reason to doubt. Supposing it, however, to be true that women's minds are by nature more mobile than those of men, less capable of persisting long in the same continuous effort, more fitted for dividing their faculties among many things than for travelling in any one path to the highest point which can be reached by it, this may be true of women as they now are, though not without great and numerous exceptions, and may account for their having remained behind the highest order of men in precisely the things in which this absorption of the whole mind in one set of ideas and occupations may seem to be most requisite. Still, this difference is one which can only affect the kind of excellence, not the excellence itself, or its practical worth; and it remains to be shown whether this exclusive working of a part of the mind, this absorption of the whole thinking faculty in a single subject, and concentration of it on a single work, is the normal and healthful condition of the human faculties, even for speculative uses. I believe that what is gained in special development by this concentration is lost in the capacity of the mind for the other purposes of life, and even in abstract thought it is my decided opinion that the mind does more by frequently returning to a difficult problem than by sticking to it without interruption. For the purposes, at all events, of practice, from its highest to its humblest departments, the capacity of passing promptly from one subject of consideration to another, without letting the active spring of the intellect run down between the two, is a power far more valuable, and this power women preeminently possess, by virtue of the very mobility of which they are accused. They perhaps have it from nature, but they certainly have it by training and education. For nearly the whole of the occupations of women consists in the management of small but multitudinous details, on each of which the mind cannot dwell even for a minute, but must pass on to other things, and if anything requires longer thought, must steal time at odd moments for thinking of it. The capacity indeed which women show for doing their thinking in circumstances and at times which almost any man would make an excuse to himself for not attempting it, has often been noticed, and a woman's mind, though it may be occupied only with small things, can hardly ever permit itself to be vacant, as a man's so often is when not engaged in what he chooses to consider the business of his life. The business of a woman's ordinary life is things in general, and can as little cease to go on as the world to go round. But, it is said, there is anatomical evidence of the superior mental capacity of men compared with women. They have a larger brain. I reply that in the first place the fact itself is doubtful. It is by no means established that the brain of a woman is smaller than that of a man. If it is inferred merely because a woman's bodily frame generally is of less dimensions than a man's, this criterion would lead to strange consequences. A tall and large-boned man must on this showing be wonderfully superior in intelligence to a small man, and an elephant or a whale must prodigiously excel mankind. The size of the brain in human beings, anatomists say, varies much less than the size of the body or even of the head, and the one cannot be at all inferred from the other. It is certain that some women have as large a brain as any man. It is within my knowledge that a man who had weighed many human brains said that the heaviest he knew of, heavier even than Cuvier's, the heaviest previously recorded, was that of a woman. Next, I must observe that the precise relation which exists between the brain and the intellectual powers is not yet well understood, but is a subject of great dispute. That there is a very close relation we cannot doubt. The brain is certainly the material organ of thought and feeling, and, making abstraction of the great unsettled controversy respecting the appropriation of different parts of the brain to different mental faculties, I admit that it would be an anomaly and an exception to all we know of the general laws of life and organization, if the size of the organ were wholly indifferent to the function, if no accession of power were derived from the great magnitude of the instrument. But the exception and the anomaly would be fully as great, if the organ exercised influence by its magnitude only. In all the more delicate operations of nature, of which those of the animated creation are the most delicate, and those of the nervous system by far the most delicate of these, differences in the effect depend as much on differences of quality in the physical agents as on their quantity. And if the quality of an instrument is to be tested by the nicety and delicacy of the work it can do, the indications point to a greater average fineness of quality in the brain and nervous system of women than of men. Dismissing abstract difference of quality, a thing difficult to verify, the efficiency of an organ is known to depend not solely on its size, but on its activity; and of this we have an approximate measure in the energy with which the blood circulates through it, both the stimulus and the reparative force being mainly dependent on the circulation. It would not be surprising, it is indeed a hypothesis which accords well with the differences actually observed between the mental operations of the two sexes, if men on the average should have the advantage in the size of the brain, and women in activity of cerebral circulation. The results which conjecture founded on analogy would lead us to expect from this difference of organization would correspond to some of those which we most commonly see. In the first place, the mental operations of men might be expected to be slower. They would neither be so prompt as women in thinking, nor so quick to feel. Large bodies take more time to get into full action. On the other hand, when once got thoroughly into play, man's brain would bear more work. It would be more persistent in the line first taken, it would have more difficulty in changing from one mode of action to another, but, in the one thing it was doing, it could go on longer without loss of power or sense of fatigue. And do we not find that the things in which men most excel women are those which require most plodding and long hammering at a single thought, while women do best what must be done rapidly? A woman's brain is sooner fatigued, sooner exhausted, but given the degree of exhaustion, we should expect to find that it would recover itself sooner. I repeat that this speculation is entirely hypothetical. It pretends to no more than to suggest a line of inquiry. I have before repudiated the notion of its being yet certainly known that there is any natural difference at all in the average strength or direction of the mental capacities of the two sexes, much less what that difference is. Nor is it possible that this should be known, so long as the psychological laws of the formation of character have been so little studied, even in a general way, and in the particular case never scientifically applied at all; so long as the most obvious external causes of difference of character are habitually disregarded, left unnoticed by the observer, and looked down upon with a kind of supercilious contempt by the prevalent schools both of natural history and of mental philosophy, who, whether they look for the source of what mainly distinguishes human beings from one another in the world of matter or in that of spirit, agree in running down those who prefer to explain these differences by the different relations of human beings to society and life. To so ridiculous an extent are the notions formed of the nature of women mere empirical generalizations, framed without philosophy or analysis, upon the first instances which present themselves, that the popular idea of it is different in different countries, according as the opinions and social circumstances of the country have given to the women living in it any specialty of development or non-development. An Oriental thinks that women are by nature peculiarly voluptuous. see the violent abuse of them on this ground in Hindu writings. An Englishman usually thinks that they are by nature cold. The sayings about women's fickleness are mostly of French origin. From the famous distich of Francis I, upward and downward. In England it is a common remark how much more constant women are than men. Inconstancy has been longer reckoned discreditable to a woman in England than in France. And English women are besides in their inmost nature much more subdued to opinion. It may be remarked by the way that Englishmen are in peculiarly unfavourable circumstances for attempting to judge what is or is not natural, not merely to women but to men, or to human beings altogether, at least if they have only English experience to go upon; because there is no place where human nature shows so little of its original lineaments. Both in a good and a bad sense, the English are farther from a state of nature than any other modern people. They are, more than any other people, a product of civilization and discipline. England is the country in which social discipline has most succeeded, not so much in conquering as in suppressing whatever is liable to conflict with it. The English, more than any other people, not only act but feel according to rule. In other countries the taught opinion, or their requirement of society, may be the stronger power, but the promptings of the individual nature are always visible under it, and often resisting it. Rule may be stronger than nature, but nature is still there. In England, rule has to a great degree substituted itself for nature. The greater part of life is carried on, not by following inclination under the control of rule, but by having no inclination but that of following a rule. Now this has its good side doubtless, though it has also a wretchedly bad one, but it must render an Englishman peculiarly ill qualified to pass a judgment on the original tendencies of human nature from his own experience. The errors to which observers elsewhere are liable on the subject are of a different character. An Englishman is ignorant respecting human nature; a Frenchman is prejudiced. An Englishman's errors are negative, a Frenchman's positive. An Englishman fancies that things do not exist because he never sees them; a Frenchman thinks they must always and necessarily exist because he does see them. An Englishman does not know nature because he has had no opportunity of observing it; a Frenchman generally knows a great deal of it, but often mistakes it, because he has only seen it sophisticated and distorted. For the artificial state superinduced by society disguises the natural tendencies of the thing which is the subject of observation in two different ways, by extinguishing the nature or by transforming it. In the one case there is but a starved residuum of nature remaining to be studied; in the other case there is much, but it may have expanded in any direction rather than that in which it would spontaneously grow. I have said that it cannot now be known how much of the existing mental differences between men and women is natural and how much artificial; whether there are any natural differences at all; or, supposing all artificial causes of differences to be withdrawn, what natural character would be revealed. I am not about to attempt what I have pronounced impossible; but doubt does not forbid conjecture, and where certainty is unattainable there may yet be the means of arriving at some degree of probability. The first point, the origin of the differences actually observed, is the one most accessible to speculation, and I shall attempt to approach it by the only path by which it can be reached, by tracing the mental consequences of external influences. We cannot isolate a human being from the circumstances of his condition, so as to ascertain experimentally what he would have been by nature, but we can consider what he is, and what his circumstances have been, and whether the one would have been capable of producing the other. Let us take, then, the only marked case which observation affords of apparent inferiority of women to men, if we accept the merely physical one of bodily strength. No production in philosophy, science, or art entitled to the first rank has been the work of a woman. Is there any mode of accounting for this, without supposing that women are naturally incapable of producing them? In the first place, we may fairly question whether experience has afforded sufficient grounds for an induction. It is scarcely 3 generations since women, saving very rare exceptions, have begun to try their capacity in philosophy, science, or art. It is only in the present generation that their attempts have been at all numerous, and they are even now extremely few everywhere but in England and France. It is a relevant question whether a mind possessing the requisites of first-rate eminence in speculation or creative art could have been expected, on the mere calculation of chances, to turn up during that lapse of time among the women whose tastes and personal position admitted of their devoting themselves to these pursuits. In all things which there has yet been time for, in all but the very highest grades in the scale of excellence, especially in the department in which they have been longest engaged, literature, both prose and poetry, women have done quite as much, have obtained fully as high prizes, and as many of them, as could be expected from the length of time and the number of competitors. If we go back to the earlier period, when very few women made the attempt, yet some of those few made it with distinguished success. The Greeks always accounted Sappho among their great poets, and we may well suppose that Myrtis, said to have been the teacher of Pindar, and Corinna, who 5 times bore away from him the prize of poetry, must at least have had sufficient merit to admit of being compared with that great name. Aspasia did not leave any philosophical writings, but it is an admitted fact that Socrates resorted to her for instruction, and avowed himself to have obtained it. If we consider the works of women in modern times, and contrast them with those of men, either in the literary or the artistic department, such inferiority as may be observed resolves itself essentially into one thing, but that is a most material one: deficiency of originality. Not total deficiency, for every production of mind which is of any substantive value has an originality of its own, is a conception of the mind itself, not a copy of something else. Thoughts original, in the sense of being unborrowed, of being derived from the thinker's own observations or intellectual processes, are abundant in the writings of women, but they have not yet produced any of those great and luminous new ideas which form an era in thought, nor those fundamentally new conceptions in art which open a vista of possible effects not before thought of, and found a new school. Their compositions are mostly grounded on the existing fund of thought, and their creations do not deviate widely from existing types. This is the sort of inferiority which their works manifest. For in point of execution, in the detailed application of thought and the perfection of style, there is no inferiority. Our best novelists in point of composition and of the management of detail have mostly been women, and there is not in all modern literature a more eloquent vehicle of thought than the style of Madame de Stael, nor, as a specimen of purely artistic excellence, anything superior to the prose of Madame Sand, whose style acts upon the nervous system like a symphony of Haydn or Mozart. High originality of conception is, as I have said, what is chiefly wanting. And now to examine if there is any manner in which this deficiency can be accounted for. Let us remember then, so far as regards mere thought, that during all that period in the world's existence and in the progress of cultivation, in which great and fruitful new truths could be arrived at by mere force of genius, with little precious study and accumulation of knowledge, during all that time women did not concern themselves with speculation at all. From the days of Hypatia to those of the Reformation, the illustrious Heloisa is almost the only woman to whom any such achievement might have been possible, and we know not how great a capacity of speculation in her may have been lost to mankind by the misfortunes of her life. Never since any considerable number of women have begun to cultivate serious thought has originality been possible on easy terms. Nearly all the thoughts which can be reached by mere strength of original faculties have long since been arrived at, and originality in any high sense of the word is now scarcely ever attained but by minds which have undergone elaborate discipline, and are deeply versed in the results of previous thinking. It is Mr. Maurice, I think, who has remarked on the present age that its most original thinkers are those who have known most thoroughly what had been thought by their predecessors, and this will always henceforth be the case. Every fresh stone in the edifice has now to be placed on the top of so many others, that a long process of climbing and of carrying up materials has to be gone through by whoever aspires to take a share in the present stage of the work. How many women are there who have gone through any such process? Mrs. Somerville, alone perhaps of women, knows as much of mathematics as is now needful for making any considerable mathematical discovery. Is it any proof of inferiority in women that she has not happened to be one of the 2 or 3 persons who in her lifetime have associated their names with some striking advancement of the science? 2 women, since political economy has been made a science, have known enough of it to write usefully on the subject. Of how many of the innumerable men who have written on it during the same time is it possible with truth to say more? If no woman has hitherto been a great historian, what woman has had the necessary erudition? If no woman is a great philologist, what woman has studied Sanskrit and Slavonic, the Gothic of Ulfila and the Persic of the Zendavesta? Even in practical matters we all know what is the value of the originality of untaught geniuses. It means inventing over again in its rudimentary form something already invented and improved upon by many successive inventors. When women have had the preparation which all men now require to be eminently original, it will be time enough to begin judging by experience of their capacity for originality. It no doubt often happens that a person who has not widely and accurately studied the thoughts of others on a subject has by natural sagacity a happy intuition, which he can suggest but cannot prove, which yet, when matured, may be an important addition to knowledge; but even then no justice can be done to it until some other person, who does possess the previous acquirements, takes it in hand, tests it, gives it a scientific or practical form, and fits it into its place among the existing truths of philosophy or science. Is it supposed that such felicitous thoughts do not occur to women? They occur by hundreds to every woman of intellect; but they are mostly lost, for want of a husband or friend who has the other knowledge which can enable him to estimate them properly and bring them before the world; and even when they are brought before it, they generally appear as his ideas, not their real authors. Who can tell how many of the most original thoughts put forth by male writers belong to a woman by suggestion, to themselves only by verifying and working out? If I may judge by my own case, a very large proportion indeed. End of Chapter 3, Part 2.